We're also going to talk about the environment in the activity, but it's not so peaceful, unfortunately.
That terang asuge korik neton chukola sheki simba na yang terang korik neton te yang this shinja ta shindi dambatin means.
So today I'm going to teach you an instructional approach called a cooperative jigsaw, a jigsaw activity.
That terang asu triati karin sena ane teaching bakashira ko ta nyamli gi ngugo ne chiagi shegu chigres ta dilaya asu ledu ki chegu sigres.
How many of you have done a jigsaw puzzle?
That the ledu ki chegu dide do chigaro ta ngasong gonyo ki chegu dide do dinyo si sa lagba chano chesa da.
Yeah, like on the table, little pieces, and you put the pieces together? Okay.
That dosa kana ngasun dide wa ta tumbu chichi chichi nyam tu de mu chembu chizwa chigaro.
So we will do the same thing, but in this case, each person is a part of the puzzle.
That dana ngasu te digi chegu te digi simba na tina de kapsa kar re sena ngasu mi susu ngoni ro me re chesu kar re sena ane ngasu de la yang gonyo chi yorwa gonyo de ge tapcha re chag yores.
And when all of the people come together, all the experts, then only can we solve the problem.
That and me sama nyam ten zon bai na ne shine kanyon de set kres.
So we will have two different types of roles that you will play. You will be an expert, and then you will be part of a home group.
That and the kasumi gere ngone chilingam de atlikum namba ni gonna drug yores. Chigne susu cheki bajike ngu gonna likachi gu yores. Nibati imbana home group like doa delaya rangde do chitashayarwa ne rangde zil din sen rukha chigore tigi tapcha chigimbe ngu gonna ya nyamle ngu ni likate chigu yores.
So each table, I think we have two tables where there are two groups, but otherwise each table will be the home group.
Da kashila ya pa ni doa delaya peche chigang le rukhani chasares temenda ne shenda karin sena ne dokse re gangla ya. And
then each person will be a different type of expert. And so what will happen is each expert will get different information than the other person, and that is needed to collectively solve the problem.
That and the cheke bar susu la susu tanda yo chigi nits mando ragres wa and then it's rano jela ya and it karil kuores na nyamdi gani ta kangiti seg chete yanti gugu yores.
This is a very important instructional approach to teach about socio-scientific issues because there's so many different types of social data and scientific data that we use to better understand socio-scientific problems.
That and again, the Imbana Sugi, Chitsotan David, Henrik Netun Tinado, Tiagi, Tablan, Kitchambuchi Chagores, Karchila Baina, Chitsotan David, Henrik Netun Tinado, Layakoge, Chitsotan David Chatrian, Gua Kanchilayan, Henritan David Chatrian, Gua, then the Mampu Chinyamton Dugi, and the Chekipa Mampu Susugani, and the Yamru Gonilika Chiagi, Netanchi Orwa, the Kitchambuchagores.
So you might ask, well, I want to be a science teacher, not a social studies teacher teaching economics, history, geography. So why should I worry about social science data in my science class? You might ask that.
Teaching a chitsuga, ngani tsari gigan teaching to the yes, and chitso tsari tanda yo chigi chita, natsuga, samkan rupata, chiso rupata, tinado yo chigitizu, ngala and job, and the garage indication which is chago, and I can saw some of the whole race.
So why do you think that might matter? Why should the science teacher be aware of economics, geography, history, and other social sciences?
That's a courage and indication in Begongo is that Henry Johnny Chim by Naya, Massachusetts Henry and Roy, Jugita, Penjuru Patan, Sankan Patan, then Luigi last Opaginta, Chitos Henry and Roy, Jugi, Neto Mampuchi, Shigua, the courage indication Begongo is.
단다 니 차장 파서 뜨루라 모연에서 직 하고 와라 돼서 차장기 휴진 당 되고라 차장기 모연에서 직 하고 와라 벤조레 다 시소대 차장라 빈지 뜨루인 비준 세계다 장고래 라이저라
Everything depend on each other, so to have a holistic picture of the situation, we need to know all the components that affect the situation.
Yes, in the real world, everything is connected. In the textbook, we can keep things theoretical and separated. That's a good response. What are some other ideas?
Yapna sonsta asugi chi teb ginana imbana chi sairi su pa chi sha yorwas ro imbana tong is ngune ge mising na sang ko teb bana cha ma chi la chi teng de de yores te lan yapna sons ni shenda yesa akaza
chik di dan siri gigen singwenerda ta kasang anzo labti gi thalon nalon ne ani rishon da deni se jorwa
re
di chen di sambal dal lobtu pigi jabjung dam da mangbusi le yungu yorwa le di sambal ya lobtu kurang gi chele khari na kurang gi jabjung gi nizu khari shingi yuna an tedan deni siri di ma chiri cheba yimba ina ani kunzu gi yanjik semlen jugla da dig nubashu cher thwe jorwa o tinde gi gesen yusares
that's all as a science instructors, we have mentioned about culturally relevant pedagogy, and if we know the background history of the student, it's easier for us to teach and easier for them to understand if we bring in culturally relevant topics or examples.
Yes, that's an excellent point. We can think about using the social aspect as a hook, as a way to encourage and increase motivation of the learners, so then we can then teach them the natural science.
Da dandagi pe lanya budus tanda picha shabai na ngasuge chitsok ne ton ton revi ge nitu ta jabjong tu imba na ngasuge chi anyi tawro ta anyi taw ta songkorang guya ge tablan do la ya peche tonan ko resta te peche ton de ta ne te la ten de ta ngasuge ne send ki she te phang to chitkhnan ko res.
So today we're going to explore a topic of climate change in Tibet, on the Tibetan plateau.
Mahanda tine imbana ngasuge pe ge thogang la yo pe ge ani namshig jirdo tan revi ge joshi ko la ta yins.
So I will present this as a socio-scientific issue where we try to understand the perspective of different people around the Tibetan plateau and how they are affected by climate change.
Da danda de karala na ngasuge chitsok tan revi senri ke netun chilaya ta che ani de so de ngasuge ta chi mi gi ta chele mandro se gorwa chele mandro mi mangpo chi ne pe gi thugang ga thala yo pe gi ani thala yo pe gi ta mi gi chele mandro mangpo chi la ya ani namshi gi jido ko shuching kana do chi te gi yo me te ta yes.
This could be considered an example of place-based education, because even though we are not physically right now sitting on the Tibetan plateau, it is culturally relevant for Tibetan Buddhist monastics.
Da danda de bana ngasuge chini bana de ngasu ni ti shisha be ge lobsu ge la dra do chi samla tamna digo res ta de gar chila bana chini ngasu ta tong yes da pena yo ma da bana ya chi rijung de thene ro ani ngasu ta pepa ge tachin sola ya danda ge netun di ani dhawa yo pachi chag yo res.
Before I share some information about the activity, I want to ask how many of you have heard something about climate change? Just raise your hand.
Ta ngasu chegudu kuma chingala ya ani chesu ge chi ngasu namsigin jidok se gorwa climate change namsigin jidok ko la ya ani ko nyonju yuna ne lagba yar chang ro ches.
Okay, good. How many of you have heard specifically about climate change affecting the Tibetan plateau?
Da mixe gerwa namsin jidok la ten de te nga pe gi thogang la ya shuchin te gi yo pe ti ko la ya ani kunyo yo pa na lagba chang ro ches.
Okay, about half of you. So the Tibetan plateau is sometimes called the third pole. We have the North Pole, the South Pole, and the Tibetan plateau is so important in understanding climate change that it's sometimes called the third pole.
that Tandanga Super Toconte Laya, and some Salakas and Nisambasiguris, that cheat Chanera, Chilhunera, Shembateta, Nasuper Pupa Toconte Segurity, Carchila Baina, Chiata. Ranshung Tene Asu Namshikin Jirdok to get the Ranshung Tonkung Tene and Hatching Chabuchaguris.
And as I have been preparing this activity and talking to my colleagues who are scientists, I realized that most people who are talking about climate change on the Tibetan Plateau are mostly scientists outside of the Tibetan Plateau, and the Tibetan people are not as aware of what is happening there.
Tanda dela ya chekundila tradichi kapsangarangi lije tanda ropatina no nyam twitendo chong songs that take kapsangala ya mixegi tunachika chong song system wala ya pegi tugangangi namshigin jidok kola ya kecha she yung kapsa she ne ma chi chi te chlono yoji gi tsang pa chang chang re dos that take kapsim bana ani chi pepa rang karwa ta pegi tugana de pepa ta pepa rang ngo ne de kala ya chi ne chi samse ta jia chi orwa te shitamindus.
Okay, so this slide is here and also at the very end of this activity. So you will see the same slide again. I'm just explaining what we are about to do because I'm teaching this lesson as though you are future teachers. So normally I would ask you to pick the role of an expert, but I want you to just wait because we're just printing some forms. I just explained that the home group is each table, and that you will get each expert. Each individual will be an expert. Nobody can sit back and relax. Everybody has to work on this type of activity.
Istambalaya Sam again, Zusichi Susuga, Netuntico Lochi, the Samlatangu Yoris, and the Chingisija de Maris.
So when we get these sheets printed off, every person will have one role and it will have a paragraph explaining your position. And then there will be some graphs or maps or some image associated with that.
That under the Bana, Takaragres, Nami Sususula, that Cheki Pagilingan Chitegora, Chekipa Sususolaya, Susuga Lincoln Tandreagi, and Nitsukachu Kotochi or Reste, Logores, Netan Dejuge, and a Pernare, Remoyim and a graph Natsu Trilla Sopatu Kotochi, yes.
So I just went into the research journal articles to find which graphs and images I thought would be most helpful. The on-site instructor's role is to help interpret the graphs.
So Lincoln the Karinsena, Susuga, Dinseng Nalaya, and the Tiriti Canada, which Kualangu, Metelaya, and Charon.
So if you remember last summer, Tenzin, Sonam and I talked about visual literacy, graphical literacy, so we're trying to integrate that into this activity.
Tonala Yopigi, Tachi Remula Sopata, Perilla Sopatita, Musia Chorota, the Kuala Musia, the Kolayan Deshajayo by yes, Rata, Tinstambalaya, Tandagi, Lontendi Capset, the young Atsugalam Senatili, Yantandus, that Rigi Pechitines.
Okay, so when we get those sheets, I will hand them out. Then there are 5 experts that we have in this activity. I will ask each expert group to go to a different place in the room so that together they make sure they understand what the text and the graphs mean. And then only everybody will come back and talk to the whole group, the home group.
aha ta tanda ti ko parloje chasuna ni khiong gores khiong bai na me re la ya cheki pa re gi lingen di ra go yorwa istambala ni ti rano go je la ya ani cheki pa ge densen so loga du gores ta cheki pa nga yo la swa nga yo bate ani nga su densen nga na du gorwa densen nga na do de te ani la ya ni su ko do chibate kare im balo ani phajo de la yo chu ge thir ka je kare de se ja go do ti samata suti ha kunu go jela ya ne kari ngares ne tanda nga sugata rangde ge rukhas to kwa rangde rukha dena yangse du sun jomya res ta rangde rukhana jom stambala ya cheki pa nga te rangde rukhana jom de yorwa.
Okay, so now I'm going to role play. Do they know role play?
Yeah.
I'm going to pretend that we have that I am a climate scientist and I have invited all of you here today to this conference. So thank you for coming to this climate change conference.
Nahada terang ye trapsan chichige yens ro ane ngane ati karsa namshin jirdok tan devi ge sanrik pachi yens ane terang sesun de la namshin jirdok tan devi ge chongdon de la paper tash delicious.
Yes. We've come today because there's a grave crisis. There is the effects of climate change on the Tibetan plateau and the grasslands is very alarming.
Ahada tiran de ngasung obade kalana naton zat apo shuji ti chong de shas ane hapar de pegi thugang ta pegi chasa gang la ya ani namshin jirdok la ten de tang thepchu gi shuchente ani zat apo ta chap chambu shuji chong de shas.
So as climate change is affecting the glaciers, that affects what type of water is available, that affects the plants, the animals, and the people.
Ahada namshigin jirdok la ten de ngasug kangri la yo pegi chorom chigor wati shya tang ti shubal la ten de ani ngasu tam ji chu yor ta tongya gi chu gi ri kari chi mampum belo yo me nitang de chungu yor sta te la ten de tang ani ti kasugurida chasari ani re chu re ani samchen re chingila sopa ge ne to mampu chila ne tingala deni mila sopa ge ne mampu chila ya shuchen tegi yores.
It is undisputed, that means nobody is challenging the fact that global human activity is causing climate change, and you can see from the image on the top from 1985 compared to the bottom in 2005 how the glaciers, the snow, has retreated.
Drongbu gi chele latine deti ane namshigin jirdok wa ta nga su kula chanjur ga netun din jongo yopate ta ta dolong chi ma gwa chi restan kha bares ta nga su tege pardila ta bai baina ane chitong gja ja changa ta ni tong nga ge paro ge parni do shandwa de dustan balaya ane chorom ti shurchi de chorom ge chichong te ha chang chon ru ba de parni nga teng dus.
The pastoralists, the people who, and the nomads who work on the plateau have known this for years. They say there's less snow, but now the scientists are saying they are able to document this, and now the world, the scientific community around the world is concerned about this.
Ta degin chi kangrin ramla denin dropa imbana na ngomas ka ha ku yores kan nyot dosha sigi yores ta tandi chala ya tanda imbana ne charupa tan haparta namshigin jirdok tan dewa ta ane kula chajir tan dewa chu ge charupa ko chu ha ku dete ta di bana de ku thulang go thu parla jat ki dete ane tanda imbana jamlo jichi gane da ko charupa ko chu de gang la tunang da thkchi gi yores.
Why is snow important?
Yeah, source of water.
Source of water, right? And so that water then is providing water for rivers all over South Asia. That water is feeding the, used by plants, by animals, by people, and what is happening is if it's melting, it's only going into the lake, and not in lakes and not into the rivers which flow down.
That dimbana ko karchina ke chambore system balaya ko ta Asia gel hoshosgal ho Asia gela jula Europe gi ta sangkham tela chapi ge ta jingi social mila sopa chama ge ti chuti dusa pechu tang yores this ke chambu chag yores ta nga su ge chorom ti dus shuba imbaina that tu mai bala shugu wa dare ma dos baina o tu shurbaina ka shugure se stambala chuti shurji ko suguna do shagores suguna do ane sampuna tuli drut ku maris.
So I have invited you here today to this conference because we need to determine whether it is the pastoralist behavior that is to blame for the degradation of the grasslands.
That didn't also the that's on the delicious some advantage that it's to Roland Chati Kariesena, Chistasa Yam good dosha said on Zuge, Chur Watatan Yam good dosha say, Nathan this hamage, Genti, Jutan Genti, Dropalaya Raleigh Mares, Dropalaya Yalas Gachikan, Nathan Chichaku Mares, the colleges to Dutan.
So there's a policy, maybe some of you have heard, a Chinese policy to remove the pastoralists and to put them into settlements in government housing.
Hada chichu khashachike chengo chres tatanda jana jongi sichilaya ane purple drawback so ane ko sathane dus ane jana konziktin chepe gi jonge da tongde nala dus pogichiku yores.
So I hope today in sessions 1 and 2 at this conference that we can answer these 3 questions. The 3 questions are, should the pastoralists be removed from their historic grazing lands? Secondly, how will the impacts of climate change be affected by the removal or the persistence of pastoralists on their grazing lands? And finally, why is it important that all of us have come together to try to discuss the problems and the solutions as a group?
Tatanda de bana tiring asu ko choton tambutan yuwa kapsu asu dus dolansi de ne dela yo pigi troa dusum chala length ha bachege thapsi tangi yes ne troa tambote kare sena asu dropa khusu ne susu sasa sathang to ni pugu chigure chigu mares ro ni patim bana ani keti dropa khusu Sathane Mutu Niwata Yana, Sathane Mara Nipu Chupatilla and the Namshikin Dodelaya, and Chuchin Telaya, Chapel, Courage in Jongur Ways, and somebody Layang Asuge, Chekipa, Natan Dembigi, Chekipa do some Yamton Zum de Tant and Neton de Ganlaya, Triduchi Gualaya, and a kitchen big ranching carriores.
Okay, so as a reminder, this is one slide describing climate science. I just want to remind you what climate change is.
Ahada tanda de gaso nyesho singola ya gaso ge namshin jirdok kola ya dus andesi jagiyes ta dinga so ta namshin jirdok sena karire saati kola ya ni chitransu tabdichtaes.
Okay, so we know that we have the sun and the sun is heating the earth.
Ahada gaso ha kwete kala na gaso ge ta treti nima ge treti la tene deta skola chabu chago ba tenga so ha ko yores.
In the meantime, people are burning carbon-based items, including especially fossil fuels, and that's releasing the gas carbon dioxide.
Tanda ngasu geta mi la sopa ge mi gita rawang asu piziti pechetan lapar te tanda ge juddu ge pizi pechetan dete ani ta carbon tan dembi ge newton trans tambalaya carbon solong ni donte ni dente dus lugu yorwa oti dus ani panola lugu yores.
So carbon dioxide is a gas. There are other gases as well, but it's one of the most important ones that causes like a bubble that's like a greenhouse around the earth.
Ta tandanga suge jangkhang ge nindi segoro ata ti tini ge chitang ge da langje de mangbo yorda tinani ke chishi chite ne carbon solon denti chagores ta ko yandu de ten kar chagores na ko buandu uganda ugana ba chichi de te ani te ge ani ngasula ya jangkhang ge nibas gora jangkhang nindi de temper chigores. And
then what happens is the heat that has been absorbed by the earth is unable to escape. It's trapped, and then the earth's surface is becoming warmer.
That tigi tanda jangkhang nindi tila tende karchigura sana nyamani ma yongju treti sukula ge shunguni sholola ye tret kuyo maris ro shololan rut kuyo maris ta sholon druma kistambala ya sukula ge chungite ni tor du yores.
And the majority of the earth is actually covered by water. Even the oceans are becoming warmer, and this has an impact on the currents and how the water is moving around the earth.
당아서 스콜라기 슝이 패치와도 추고 역사 장수고 역사 여러와 어떤다기 아니 장칸 님디 딜라테네다 콜라 산준 딜라테네다 장수고 추고 트세이 바나야 파고요레스와 추고 트세야 페바를 파울라테네데 나가수 장수고 추디 고고 슈가게 주야지 여러와 군르야만 주야지 여러와 티졸라 소파임 바나야 고고 슈킨 페고요레스.
So we might think what's happening on the Tibetan Plateau and in the Himalayas, how is that affected by the rest of the globe? But the whole earth is one system.
다다가수 지치바나 지부게 토강다 히말라야 질라 총비게 남신 지독게 식진 가나도 지테게 요나 아젠달레 체버카리오나 삼고요스 바레스 이바나 단단델랑아수 고고에테 스콜라 티차 참바데 다 도도치로 말라시로와 참말레 식진 되게 요레스.
So the behavior of people from around the world, including Europe, Australia, Canada, United States, where we burn a lot of fossil fuels, is having a negative impact in the Himalayas.
다 미기 젤릴 하버드 단다 아리레 아니 캐나다레 유럽레 다 가사코 임바나 텔라야다 하버등아수가 카본고 포지티 시첨부 발고여와 대주고 바위기 젤레 텔라테네데데 아니 페탄 단다다 젤 하버드 히말라야 단다 페기 도강기 남식인 지로 텔라야 시첨부터기 요레스.
So climate change is not just the changing of seasons. That is, the seasons are affected by climate change, but that is not what defines climate change.
다당가서 남신 지도선에 남티기 지도대 말레스와 남티기 지도대 말레스다 남티기 지도 값에 다지 남티 값에 아니 남식인 지도라테네 직식진 티스타 원원고 요레스 임반디 지바 말레스.
So now what I would like to do is give you some background information that all of the experts need. I have one sheet that's on the each table, but I will explain it here. It's both in English and Tibetan, and we will make sure it's in the Google Classroom, so when you do the activity, you have access to this.
Google Classroom
Okay, so I will try not to read every single word, but at least give you some of the main ideas. So we know that the Tibetan Plateau is essential as a source of water for major river systems throughout Asia, including many of these rivers here, the Yellow River, the Brahmaputra, the Ganges, Indus River.
단다 벽이 도관식으로 도관데 네 단다 이시나네 추첨부 망부 지금 용콘도 작업을 스피치하시나 맞춘 지점은 그치하니 다주 감법당 상계 감별라 소박이 주 망부 지금 용콘도 작업을
And about 3 billion people rely on these river systems.
다 추기 말라 데라다 벽이 도관의 저기 춘 데라야 아니 민보 탐분 숨스 데라 땡기요레스.
So on the Tibetan Plateau, the average temperature has risen by 1.5 centimeters per decade over the past 50 years.
다 데비로 나치나 타바임바나 루치리 삼라야 베게 토강강 그 드세데 아니 디그리 석세스와 디그리 석세스 지상하게야 파샤스 루치리 삼라.
This is 3 times the global warming rate. This is a crisis.
다 데갈라나 지르기 차뇽게 가수 콜라 산주르게 지금 리서치가 와텔라 드르바임바나디 답승게 치와요 레스 디스탐발라 데 자타 부샤게 레스.
With less water, the animals of the plateau suffer.
다 추뇨 체발라테네데 아니 고 토강라 네비게 아니 소차 고슬라야 강게테게 레스.
I'm using the word suffer not thinking about from a Buddhist perspective, not about consciousness. I'm using suffer so that we all, as experts here, have some empathy for the system.
다 달라 인치 시티 서퍼도 거와다 delaya 등에 양거 스트레메 강에 태고레스 따라 다 디셔야디 갈라나 바이나 양아서 지 등에 세야디 지어라단다 나슈는 등에데 많이 받지 티나도 공부하지마 거지 단다데 값을 티 트랙 에전시 소티 가린세나 아니가서 지 구솔라야 아니 또 진양지 스거로 왔다 샤차세 지거로 왔다 냠는 거 샘티 디시 제 chonga chete dus yes.
So 82% of the plateau's glaciers have retreated.
Aha da thogang ge charam chi yorwa charam te ge jacha chani chi dus kumshas da shushas goro kumshas na.
And the animals on the plateau include wild yak, the Tibetan antelope, wild ass, and the gazelle. They are all being affected by less water.
Aha da chu junyo somba la tene de pu gi thogan yo pi ge da mixi gi richi gi so char wa da drong ta che ta chang ta gwala so pa mambu chi la ya shu chen tre gi yores.
As well as domestic yak and Tibetan sheep. These are domestic animals. They also are affected.
Aha dem se ta nga su ge goshi sam chen wa so ta so lu la so pa la ya shu chen tre yores.
And these are essential for the livelihood of the people, the nomads and pastoralists.
Aha da robala chamba imba na dizu kusu chuni la ha che ke chembu cha yores.
So with less water, the plants and soil suffer.
Aha da chu nyonga la tene de te ane zhen ten sa yang nyang ge yores kang ge yores.
So remember, by suffering, I mean that there's a negative impact on them.
Aha ta kang ge yores stambala ya shuching emba thek yo patela ku res.
So with less water, the soil is more likely to erode. That means it blows away. So you can see here in this picture, with less water, there are fewer plants, and then the soil escapes from the ground, from the surface.
Aha ta chu nyonyo stambala ya sa ti nyese chige sa nyese se ya nyese se ya de sa la barwa ta chu me ba na sa chi ya ma khia ta zu li lau cha garwa.
Almost all the studies have shown that the plants are affected negatively with less water, except I found one paper saying that some species of trees do better.
Aha ta tanda ko ge Tsering ke simji ke nyen thumang po chi na la ya tanda chunyo ba la tanda de shin la ya shu chen ngem ba te ku du se te shu chen bo de sha sim ban te na ne kang chi ke ne ko chun nyong chim ba na ya tanda de yorwa shindong ge ni ri kha chi ne ko jima tan ro pe jin ro ge na ba tin da shi dus.
And then with less water, the Tibetan people suffer.
Aha ta te chu nyong la tanda ta ne pe mi la ya kang ge go res.
So as I explained before, the Chinese government explains that it's because of the pastoralists keeping their animals on the plateau that this is the reason for the grasslands being depleted.
Aha da jashung ka se go se stambal ndok pa zu ga chathang la ya ni shu su chunye chi wala ten de te cha sa tang te ani nyam gud du go res de si ja go res.
So the Chinese government says once we remove the Tibetan people from the plateau, then harmony will be restored.
Aha da jashung ka se go res na ta ndok pa ko sa thang na mang khre ni po ji sha ba na sa tang tan ro yo chu ge ta ko ni tang te yang chi nyam si chi te se go res.
But the pastoralists say for thousands of years they've lived with the land. They are worried they will lose their way of life and their culture.
Aha ta ndok pa zu ka se go lungo ton thang mang po la ya ni sa tan du se de ba yes ke te nga su ma la ya ni po che ba na ne su ge jong tong so ro tang ge ni tang chi go wa te du sa la ru res te ko la sam che chi dus.
So today some of you are experts as scientists, some of you will be assigned the role of Chinese policymaker so that we can understand this topic from multiple perspectives.
Ha da tirang ge chego di kap se mi khashi chi ba na kari ge chego de gur sna chain pa ge ya lengen di de gu yores khashi chi ba na ja shong ge sichu zung khan yor wa sichu zun ni chi gor wa o ti ge ko ti ha gu re tin sta ba la ga su chama ga ne nyam re ga ne ne tun de la taris.
It will be tempting to fall into the discourse of debate, but today we will explore another way for different perspectives to be shared without engaging in debate.
Aha che ba imba na tanda ge ne don de ya chi dolang ga namba chi la cha se pare sim ba na ya tirang asu ge ya chi dolang ga namba la ya mandu we ga na ya chi ne ton se yu chu ge ne tang de na ru chi ngu chi yes.
So even though you may have some bias that maybe the Tibetan people should
Tepatina Samlatan de, and then I said Troatirwa, and a pig, Sasa Satana, you pig and Dropatezo, Jashunga Kodichi Shaju with that Tondechi or Tila Po Gundumundu say, take collected the chains.
Are you ready to engage in the activity?
Chago Drag Tatu Ayosa.
Yes, okay. So there are 5 expert roles in this jigsaw activity.
I said
they, but maybe I should say we have. I have invited you. Pastoralists, okay. Policy makers, that means the Chinese politicians. Scientists. Ecotourism operators, okay, people who are running tours, nature tours. And then the farmers who live downstream from the plateau, who need the water.
That Chekipa Ngayo Batikares, and a tampote dropa chiro, and Yibate Jashonge, Sichu Zunite, Sympathy Sanripa chiro, Shibate, and a Nochigi Ukrainian cancer, and also Yukur Tunchamba Koduchi Chiro, the Yantlopper, Ranshongo Kuritina Latani Chiro, or Teche, and a Nabatica Zambu and Ramjila Yopagi Shimbares.
So what we will do now, I think Tenzin, do you have that? Oh, this is the sheets. Tenzin and I will pass out the information sheets for each of the experts. As soon as you have that, then I will tell you where you need to go to meet just within your expert group so you understand your role and understand the graph that we've given you.
Or this Tambala Koko and Duguni Lab goes, and it's Chekipa Susuga Dinsen to Stambala and Susula Tesha Jugi Nitsiti Law Mushibache, and the Tinalaya, and the Tirantina Kaching Kutuchiores, the Suyo Talochiguris.
So we will do that for, I'm guessing, maybe at least 25, 30 minutes when you are with your expert group, really understanding the content. And then we will bring you back to the home group. And again, this is not a debate, but a discussion about how all of the 5 pieces of data come together so that you can answer the question, should the pastoralists be removed from the plateau?
That under the Kasarwa, Susu, the Chekipage Densen Ateli drew that to the Chibikapsang Asokama Nistanga Sumchinochi Tangi Insra, that under the Kapsa Sutikala, to the Chinu Jela Kamanistanga Sumchi Jela and Susuga Randi Rokola on the town and the to the Chiarestra, the take up such Dolanga Nambatin Maguachira, Suting Asuka race and a Troa Kadira Lentego race, the Chekipa Mandra Angan Dusun Zomion Stambalayan Zom Dede. Ani Robatizu Kusuga Sasani Maralaya, Nepuchi Gundumundu Sachorwa, Drotirwa, Tegalani Chekipa Nagi to the Chigu or what there is.
There is no right or wrong answer. So we might have 10 or 12 different opinions from the home groups, but more importantly, that you are using the data that we've given you to justify your claim.
Tachichi by Vananga Sodelaya, Randi Rukota, Randi Rukane, and it's some Manda or what under Troatigelaya, Juton Chonitinaya, Yunseparis, that Delaya Troa Len Dubare, nobody said in Nayomaris. Imana Kechishitaka system Susu, Samsu Sonsa Jutilaya, and Delaya, Susuga, Japting Pantagores, Pantaticari, Tangugores system, Chisulo Kutuchi Shajuga Nitsutan, and it Kirichigorwa, to the Kutuchi Gugores, some to station and Guomares, Gorora, Pantagores.
And so we've got a few on-site instructors here. I will ask that they don't take a role because then they can move around and just help interpret the graphs and the maps in case, just maybe some of the monastic groups need some guidance interpreting these. So don't take one of the stakeholder or expert sheets, okay?
Yeah, Tsering gain or Tsering Consul Banat and the Michel Tsering gain or Consul Banat and the Cheki Bangage, Lingeti Machina Digdus, Roanish, so Yama pay the and Consulaya, Nantonti Kuala, Anil Hapat and the Tirizu, Candas logo you make or data and a graph to Canado logo you met and a Motochi Naranas.
Are there any questions about what we're doing?
nga su kare ji gu gu yu me ko la ya draw ayo sa mena me la ta ma kar re yeah no questions
No questions. I think
Yeah.
once you start, then it will make sense. We won't finish in session 1. We will have to stop the discussion. You can have a tea break, and then in session 2, we will finish the activity. Yeah.
aha nga su tan da choda tambola sa ga mare choda tambola e tre de che ane so che person ta sho yo ane nyam te chi chi chawa chi gres